Okay, busy week inside the Lords. Let me start off with coronavirus. I am, by the way, going to get to the football because obviously it is rather preoccupying the nation and me as it goes, and I'm delighted. But anyway, let me start with what's happened inside the Lords directly. I started off with a quick question on memory services for people with dementia. If you have dementia, you really need to get, or if you suspect you have, you really need to get a diagnosis in order to be able to access services. And you need a diagnosis that says what kind of dementia you have. And one of the things that the questions allowed, and this is one good thing about questions in the House of Lords, was to raise something that's a small issue but very important. Because, of course, during COVID, the memory services have all gone online. Now, I've also had to listen to Lord Bethell, the Health Minister, who in brackets is actually getting into trouble for supplying Matt Hancock's friend with a pass when he shouldn't have, and it's been reported to the Standards Committee. But anyway, I had to ask, Lord Bethell has gone on throughout this whole thing about the gains of lockdown are, for example, that we've learnt how brilliant digital services are in medicine. And I wanted to point out that if you are somebody who is already having some discombobulation in terms of your memory, the last thing you're going to be able to cope with is a Zoom consultation or even a phone consultation. And also, GP surgeries are not open enough, not all of them. Lots of them are now doing online stuff. And it's often GPs who pick up the early signs of dementia when patients present for something else. So I was glad to have the opportunity to push something that Dementia UK and John's campaign have been talking about. And so I raised that. I think it's important that we ensure that we really aspire to returning to normal. And normal is the way it was before COVID. We might then decide that we're going to have an additional online medical services as well, but we shouldn't allow what's happened to us in the last 16 months to dictate in a kind of fatalistic way. Oh, well, now we've discovered these good things, so we're going to do that instead. So that was one thing I was pleased with. I then went and had a discussion on the Coronavirus Act 2020, and to explain this, we were in the Grand Committee. There was only 9 people involved, and that's because all of the Grand Committee proceedings on statutory instruments was basically just nodding through something that had already been agreed, which is the Coronavirus Act had been renewed, and that there was 12 regulations within it that were not being renewed. And in a way, it's just a formality. They just have to do it. But statutory instruments like this and the whole debates around these kind of legal changes are important because it gave me an opportunity to raise the point that these 12 regulations that had been allowed to lapse were considered to be the only things that were no longer necessary, which is very frightening because the Coronavirus Act is very big, very comprehensive and very authoritarian. And these 12 regulations are very minor. It's also the case that the Coronavirus Act is not up for discussion again until September, and even then it will be whether it's to be renewed or not, rather than scrapped completely. And I was drawing attention to the fact that if, as the new Secretary of State for Health is indicating, the 19th of July really was going to be a step into normal, not new normal, then why don't they just get rid of the Act then? We shouldn't need that piece of legislation that we were told was temporary and an emergency. Well, there's no emergency. The temporary is run out of time. But the Minister sadly confirmed that they will in fact carry on. All of that regulation will be still on the statute books until September. And even then, as I say, not guaranteed to go. So I think we have to use the opportunity, as it were, in Parliament, or everyone in the public sphere, to ensure that when hopefully everything is more or less resumed on the 19th of July, although, I know there will be exceptions to that we don't allow the law to carry on holding within it the capacity to remove freedoms. Illiberal laws that were brought in this emergency. We have to keep our eye on that because it's easy to want to think, I never want to think about that time again, and then realise too late that what's going on. I also started for the first time to talk about the Skills Bill. I've mentioned it here before. I mentioned how I missed the second reading. So I went and spoke on the Skills Bill. There was one bit that was very enjoyable in my first speech, which was that before me, Lord Adonis, Andrew Adonis spoke. I have to say it was one of the best speeches I've ever heard in the House of Lords. Absolutely brilliant. No notes. Really captured what was problematic about the skills bill. And he pointed out something very important, which he said most of what's in the skills bill, and those of us who are excited that further education and training and skills are having a spotlight, but he pointed out you don't need actually a piece of legislation for this. Most of it could just be done through different arrangements. And I do think there's a dangerous abuse of the law. But one thing that was funny was that Andrew Adonis made the point of saying that this was, he related it to how we turned our back on the EU, and yet we were trying to emulate the German skills agenda. And I enjoyed saying that I agreed with Lord Adonis, although he was wrong that we had not left Europe, because he said we'd left Europe. And I said, no, we've left the EU. And I was a great fan of the German skills way of organising anyway. But one of the problems with the bill is that the government in some ways are doing that thing where they're kind of using legislation potentially to virtue signal. So they're really emphasising localism and place, and saying you don't have to leave somewhere that you've been brought up and lived to go off to university or move, and it's a way of maintaining that towns that are sometimes neglected, people have to leave because there's not enough jobs, get deserted of young people. A sentiment we can all agree with. But there's something about the way they've done it, which is they're basically arguing that the bill should confine those skills which are available to people in a local area to those skills that are needed by that local area, which also can be a trap. I mean, you want people to have the choice to stay, but not that you're confined to the kind of local, this is another fatalism point, that you have to only have jobs in what's available locally to you. The other thing that they've done is, and I understand again the reasons for this, is they've taken away power from a range of quangos that exist in the training sphere. The problem is they've emphasised that the people who should decide which skills you get training for locally are employers, i.e. bosses. This is very limiting. I mean, it's fine to involve employers, but to confine what we learn to the local employers is short-sighted, short-term. And, training should not just be where, the bosses say, we want these kind of workers, and they're kind of delivered by the state. I mean, I find it very uncomfortable. So I was kind of arguing against that. The second amendment was one where I actually wasn't going to say that much. It was a set of amendments that basically did what keeps happening is it was an attempt to hijack the skills bill to make yet once more arguments for net zero, environmentalism, a kind of orthodoxy which we're familiar with. And it was, I thought, a set of ludicrous amendments put forward by, wait for it, the, what are they called? I can't remember what they're called now. Hold on. Peers for the Planet. I mean, a more self-righteous crowd you've never heard. And they all kept congratulating each other for being in Peers for the Planet. And they then said, well, all training and all skills has to make sure that it fits in with net zero. And I was asking some questions about, does that mean you can't be a car mechanic anymore unless it's for electric vehicles, or et cetera, et cetera. I won't repeat the speech. The thing that was really galling about it was that in the course of the speeches that they were all making, they expanded this from the skills agenda to basically say that further education colleges should effectively make sure that every student who went to them was inculcated into a way of thinking about the planet, climate change being the thing that should be preached to them. And I was, incensed. So I got to my speech, rather rambled on. But at the end, the most significant thing here was at the end of my speech, there'd been lots of kind of, guffawing during it. The person who put the motion forward originally, Baroness Hayman, who set up Peers for the Planet, said, I am glad we gave the noble Baroness Lady Fox of Buckley the opportunity to have her fix of controversialism for the day. And I was absolutely furious. Because I thought, well, excuse me, this is a piece of legislation. You've put forward amendments. Are we all meant to not say anything because you put them forward? Is it going to be a fix of controversialism if you argue against some of the orthodoxies associated with environmentalism or anything else? Why is it controversialism? Why are their amendments not controversial? Or why should it be controversial to challenge an orthodoxy? And of course it was a way of discrediting me, and it was annoying, and I didn't like it. And I think that not being allowed to disagree and controversialism issue is something I wanted to reflect on a little bit in relation to the football. Listen, I had a spat about football on Twitter that's upset me. I really enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed the whole atmosphere around England doing well, and I'm from a Celtic, kind of Welsh-Irish background, but I still wanted England to do well. I noted on Twitter that I'd seen a bunch of Danish fans interacting with a bunch of English fans on the way to the match, and it was such great fun, banter, competitive, but really well, that kind of universal football fan sort of spirit. I really enjoyed a little film that's doing the rounds, but which kind of summed it up of a very crowded group of Muslim youth in a mosque, and suddenly they all explode, and of course it's to Harry Kane's goal, as the nation did, i.e. everybody was enjoying the football, right? It was a great celebration, and it's the one time when you felt we could all come together around something. And then I saw Secret Barrister, who is somebody I regard very highly in terms of criminal justice and the work he does on that, basically saying that, can you imagine what it feels like to have publicly backed the racists on this night that Southgate's team has won? And I was furious, because I thought, why would you try and use the controversy over whether you boo the taking the knee question to basically impugn lots of English fans for being racist because they'd booed a controversy of a couple of weeks ago, in which one I thought we'd moved away from. And this was a kind of nasty, snarly, irritating tweet, which I pointed out was divisive, and why do that? And it was mean. And of course there's now been a pile-on against me, not against him, or her, because it's a Secret Barrister, because actually and everybody is just saying, oh, Claire Fox, as usual, defending the racists. And it just reminded me so much of how degraded the term racism has become, when I, as an honourable anti-racist of many years standing, can be called a racist, when football fans who object to the politicisation of football by taking the knee can then be assumed to not want to enjoy England winning, when actually they're football fans. They want to be football fans, not politically lectured to. And it doesn't matter what you think about Southgate as a football manager. He, when he brought out that letter, made a political statement. You should be able to criticise him for the political statement, cheer him on as a football manager if he's been a good football manager. So I shouldn't have replied, but I've had a miserable time. And people are saying I'm being a snowflake. This is the other thing is, it is true that when you're attacked on social media, it's really horrible, and you really want to whinge, and you really want it, as I've just done. But, I have to suck it up, right? I'm a public figure. I replied. It's my own... I have to take it. And I was on Michel Juby's programme on GB News, which I'm going to do fairly regularly. And you should watch GB News, because it's, early days, lots of bumps, but it's not... It's a really honourable attempt at creating a new kind of news channel. And I was on that, and we talked about the online safety bill. And you have to say that because of the censorship associated with the online safety bill, regardless of the abuse that I am now receiving on Twitter, so what? It is not the end of the world. I'll survive. What I was objecting to was the attempt at stirring up a divisive contempt for England fans, but we have to argue these things out. And actually, we've got an opening session at the Battle of Ideas on the 31st of July, which, by the way, tickets are actually selling out, so you've got to buy your ticket. And the opening one is how to argue better or disagree better in an era of conformity, and I'm speaking at it, so I hope that you come along to that. But it's a real genuine dilemma for us all. Okay, just finally, I travelled home because I was doing the Michel Juby thing. I watched the first half with the GB News crew in the pub, which was great, and then I had to rush on the tube home in the half time. And the tube was deserted. The streets were deserted. It was really eerie. It was like really weird. Where was everyone? They were all watching the football. It was only me travelling home. But of course, it was like it was only 3 weeks ago, under lockdown. And it was horrible. But it was a great feeling as well, because I felt so weird being one of the few travellers at that time. It felt so odd. And then it made me realise that as London opened up, as society opens up, I've got used to loads of people around again. I've got used to normal again. And seeing it being abnormal reminded me of how bad that was. So what we've got to do is to embrace normal. I appreciate that lots of us are a bit nervous. There's all this horrible culture war over masks. I really don't mind if you want to wear masks, right? I don't think you should be shamed into wearing them. But if you want to wear them, if you're a bit anxious about leaving the house, if you're a bit nervous about what it all means, fine. But I think what we need to do is not abuse each other on either side and turn it into a culture war, but encourage each other to remind ourselves that when there's loads of people around, like at the football, when we're actually part of public life and part of society, it's actually great fun. We are much better than we appear to be on Twitter. We don't tend to abuse each other. We get on with each other, and it's a great spirit, I think. So it'll be slow to return to normal, but we must persevere. And I'm glad to say that this week I've got a taste of normal by enjoying the mass crowds around football, just like everyone else, and I'll be going to the pub on Sunday night.